Good evening everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today's upload, I would like to tell you the story of D.B Cooper, the man who hijacked a plane in 1971. He was never identified or caught, resulting in one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in US history. The man used the alias Dan Cooper, but was more known as D.B Cooper. It sounds more cool. I can't tell you for sure what the weather was like around Seattle, Washington, on the afternoon and into the evening on the 24th of November 1971. It would be a shame though if, as the sun slowly dipped toward the horizon, the sky wasn't a dull, flinty grey, lit by frequent lightning flashes. It would be a shame because the story of D.B Cooper, a hijacker who has become a legend, seems to require a little bit of rain. Enough of the bad poetry, let's get on with the story. On the day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man described as being in his mid-40s bought a one-way ticket for the short half-hour flight from Portland, Oregon to Seattle. He arrived at the Northwest Orient Airlines ticket counter of Portland International Airport, wearing a black raincoat, a dark suit with a thin tie over a white shirt. He paid for the flight with cash, just a little over $18.50, and gave his name as Dan Cooper. Some of you may be wondering at this point how we got from Dan Cooper to D.B Cooper. See, the name change happened somewhere in the communications between the investigators and the news. His name was reported as DB, and with DB sounding so much more mysterious than just plain old Dan, it just kind of stuck. He boarded flight 305 carrying a black briefcase and a brown paper bag. He took the seat labelled 18E in the very back of the cabin of the 727-100. He then ordered a bourbon and soda from the stewardess. He set about drinking it as the remaining passengers boarded the plane and the flight took off. Almost as soon as the aircraft was in the air at around 2:50 p.m. Pacific time, Cooper handed the flight attendant a note. Florence Schaffner was seated behind him in the jump seat, reserved for the cabin crew. And because she just assumed he was trying to give her his phone number, she just dropped the note, unread, into her purse. With that not going the way he had planned, Cooper leaned back to Schaffner and whispered, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." The note said something very similar, and insisted that Schaffner should come sit beside him. When she joined him in row 18, she immediately asked what probably would have been my first question, and that was, "Can I see the bomb?" Cooper quickly opened and then closed the black briefcase. Schaffner later would tell the investigators that the case contained 8 red cylinders connected by wires to what appeared to be a battery. At this point, Cooper told Schaffner to write down his demands, which included $200,000 in negotiable American currency, 2 front parachutes and 2 rear parachutes, and he wanted it all brought to the runway in Seattle, and he wanted it all be there by 5 p.m. She took the written demands to the cockpit, where the pilot, Captain Scott, relayed them to the Northwest Flight Operations in Minnesota. Now, if you think that $200,000 seems like a pretty low number to go through all this trouble for, you have to think and keep in mind that this would equate to somewhere in the regions of $1.5 million today. It would have also been a reasonable amount of money for the airline to gather up as $20 bills in a couple of hours on a Wednesday afternoon. While Schaffner was in the cockpit, Cooper began speaking to Tina Mucklow, another flight attendant on flight 305. He gave her a list of further demands, which included that Mucklow would bring the money and parachutes on board. He also requested that the fuel trucks should be waiting when they arrived in Seattle, and that the other passengers should all remain in their seats until the ransom was delivered. He also told her that the other passengers would be released once his demands were met. Incidentally, there may have been an air marshal on the flight from Portland to Seattle. As the plane circled, waiting on the arrival of the parachutes and cash, a man, referred to only as Cowboy because of his hat, interacted with Cooper and Mucklow as they sat in the rear of the cabin. The interaction with Cowboy was referenced in their interviews with the FBI by both another passenger and the stewardess. Strangely, the man in the cowboy hat was never interviewed, nor was his identity ever released. Shortly after 5 p.m, when everything Cooper had demanded had been gathered at the Seattle-Tacoma airport, the flight was finally permitted to land. The 727 touched down at around 5:45 p.m. and was parked away from the main terminal. The passengers remained seated while the parachutes and cash were brought onto the plane by a single airline representative. This was another of Cooper's demands. Mucklow retrieved the items from outside of the aircraft. With his cash in hand, Cooper did as he had promised and allowed the passengers to disembark. While he was making sure that the money was all there, Mucklow asked, as a joke I assume, if she could have some, and he handed her a packet of 20s. She told him she couldn't take money from a passenger and handed it back. Around this time, another flight attendant asked Cooper if they could leave along with the passengers, to which he responded, "Whatever you girls would like." In the time that it took to refuel the plane, Cooper explained to the flight crew how was it that he wanted the plane to be flown once it was in the air. This included speed and altitude requirements, and that he wanted the landing gear to remain down. The 727 was flown to Reno with its cabin unpressurized. There, it would be refueled and continue its flight to Mexico City. The flight requirements made by Cooper at this point indicate that he had a reasonably extensive knowledge of the aircraft's capabilities. Oh, and because the airline executives refused to allow the 727 to take off with its rear stairwell deployed, poor Tina had to stay back on board when all the other flight attendants left, as Cooper would need her help lowering them once the plane was in the air. I sure hope someone thought about giving her a bonus. Flight 305 took off en route to the Reno-Tahoe International Airport, approximately 2 hours after it had arrived in Seattle. Soon after the plane was in the air, Mucklow helped Cooper lower the rear stairs, and he sent her to the cockpit around 8:15 p.m. Then there was a change in air pressure, quickly followed by the tail section lurching upward, enough to require the pilot to adjust the trim. When the flight touched down in Reno, Cooper and his bomb, the cash, and 2 parachutes were all gone. All that he left behind was his clip-on tie clip, and some cigarette butts. He also left some fingerprints and what would be discovered later, some DNA. D.B. Cooper just jumped out into what I hope was a stormy night and disappeared. He became a legend because, well, first of all, that name. How come somebody called D.B. not be a legend? More than anything though, he committed the only unsolved case of air piracy or hijacking in US history. I think, or at least I hope, that he got away with it too. Now, some will argue that he died that night. They will say that his chute didn't open, or there was no way for him to survive the landing in the heavily wooded, rugged terrain. Or that even if he did manage to make it to the ground safely, there was no way he could make it out of the freezing wilderness alive in nothing but a suit and a pair of loafers. He was a badass. Those who think that he didn't survive the jump will point as evidence to some of the ransom money found along the Columbia River by Brian Ingram in 1980. The then 8-year-old found 3 bundles of $20 bills that contained a total of $5,800. One of the bundles had 10 of its bills removed. Other than this, the cash was still banded and in the same order in which Cooper had received it. I think this may actually be proof that Cooper did land safely. Why else would 10 of the $20 bills have been removed? Also, Mucklow told investigators that Cooper had complained that the money had not been delivered in a backpack and that he would be forced to improvise as a way to carry it all. He may have needed to leave some or most of it behind in order to escape the area quickly, in which case he could have taken only a few $100s to pay for travel and expenses. Another piece of evidence put forward as proof that Cooper did not survive the jump is that several years into the investigation, the FBI began to believe that he was not an experienced skydiver or parachutist. They say he jumped with an inoperable training parachute as his reverse chute, and the primary parachute he chose was an older and of lesser quality than the one that he left behind. This, along with his making the jump in the cold and dark without the appropriate helmet or boots, indicate to them that he had little or no experience. Again, when viewed from a slightly different angle, this evidence could point in a completely different direction. The FBI believes that since he had little experience, he was unlikely to survive the jump. If, on the other hand, he chose the lesser quality chute because it was something he was more familiar or comfortable with. This could show that he was an experienced skydiver. This would increase the odds that he did survive. He may have used the pack from the backup chute to carry the money and simply thrown the silk out of the plane. And we have no idea what kind of survival equipment he carried in the brown paper bag. I think there is more evidence pointing to Cooper having the experience and training that would have allowed him to successfully reach the ground that night. For example, as Mucklow and other flight attendants described it, his demeanour was calm and polite. He didn't seem to be too shaken at all by the stressful situation. He made jokes and small talk with them, even simply handing Mucklow $2,000 when she asked for some cash. He did all this knowing that he would soon be jumping out the back of an aircraft with a parachute that he could not be 100% sure would work. Cooper had a good understanding of the capabilities of the 727-100. He probably selected this aircraft as his target because it would be easy to exit from the rear with a parachute. He also knew what the plane's stall speed was and was able to direct the pilot to fly just slightly above that, giving him a better chance to make a clean exit. We could even infer that he understood that flying with the landing gear down would limit the aircraft's range. This allowed him to reroute to Reno for refueling, possibly so he could jump from the plane at a predetermined location. In the 50 years since Dan Cooper bailed out the back of the 727 and disappeared into the night, the FBI has had a lot of suspects. Some of them have been legitimate. They are people that the FBI actually investigated, while others have been put forward by family members or, in a few cases, are people who have come forward to claim that they themselves were D.B. Cooper. With his calm demeanour in a situation where his life was on the line, it seems likely that whoever D.B. Cooper was, he would have had some military training and most likely some combat experience. The parachute he selected and the knowledge of the aircraft's capabilities imply that he perhaps had undergone some sort of military jump school or avionics training. And there's a pretty long list of combat veterans and military pilots, along with some conmen and common criminals who have come and gone through the FBI's radar. Even with the fingerprints and DNA, it doesn't seem like that they have ever been close to figuring out D.B. Cooper's true identity. It just seems right, somehow, that with D.B. Cooper now most likely dead, we don't have any idea who he was, just as it would have been right, if on the night in 1971, as D.B. Cooper slowly descended into the trees with $200,000 tied around his waist. While there have been plenty of suspects, ones the FBI deem credible, we are still no closer to knowing who he was today as we were 50 years ago. Personally, out of the 15 plus suspects, the guy who I think most resembles the suspect's sketches is William J. Smith. Was he a hero or just a plain criminal? People like this tend to have a cult following decades after the fact. I like the fact that we do not know who he is. It adds more mystery, and for me personally, leaves that Bond-like character I have of him in my head. Well, that is all for tonight. I hope you enjoyed this. I did. My next upload will be about the Dyatlov Pass incident. So please like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good night. Bye.